As you all know, Prime Minister arrived in South Africa on August 22nd, day before yesterday, to participate in the 15th BRICS Summit. And you also know, as has been announced much earlier, that the summit is being held under the theme BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, a theme which has been captured, reflected across various sessions of the BRICS, including the latest session which is currently ongoing, which is essentially the BRICS Africa outreach, as also the BRICS Plus format, where more than 64 participating countries, international organizations are currently engaged in discussion. Prime Minister's first engagement soon after his arrival was the BRICS Business Forum Leaders Dialogue. Very important and a significant part of intra-BRICS cooperation is the BRICS Business Forum. Held a day-long session which was concluded by the BRICS leaders themselves in the evening of 22nd, in which they outlined their own respective visions of how their respective economies can interface with the business ecosystem, business forum ecosystem of the BRICS countries, and in turn contribute to the growth and prosperity of the BRICS countries themselves. In his address, Prime Minister highlighted several key aspects, but I would broadly touch upon four. One, which I just said, that Honorable Prime Minister highlighted that the BRICS Business Forum is one of the key pillars of intra-BRICS partnership among the BRICS countries. Two, what is the significance of India's growth story? What is its value for the intra-BRICS cooperation through the modality of the BRICS Business Forum? The opportunities that the India growth story presents, the value proposition that it brings, whether it is in terms of trade, technology, capital, or all elements of that. Three, given the kind of larger churn and uncertainty that we are all experiencing around the world, he did speak about an important element of the need to develop resilient and inclusive supply chains. We all saw during COVID how the disruption in the pharmaceutical supply chains so adversely affected many of the countries' efforts to provide health security to their citizens. So it was a prime example of that. And three, for last, of course, the importance of mutual trust and transparency as the intra-BRICS countries cooperate and grow forward. Later that evening, on the 22nd, Honorable Prime Minister participated in the Leaders' Retreat, which was a closed-door session meant only for the leaders. Yesterday, Prime Minister attended the structural sessions of the BRICS Summit, and later in the evening yesterday, the dinner and the cultural event hosted by the Honorable President of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Today, as I just mentioned a little while ago, the BRICS leaders are currently participating in the BRICS Africa outreach and the BRICS Plus dialogue, which 65 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In his address today to the BRICS Africa outreach and to the BRICS Plus event, Honorable Prime Minister highlight what he is a very strong believer in, and he has led this right from the front, is what the BRICS brings on the table for the Global South, for the larger Global South. Honorable Prime Minister himself led the first Voice of Global South Summit ever earlier in January this year, ahead of substantive and intense engagement of G20 leadership beginning. And the whole idea was to really understand from the countries of the Global South as to what are their priorities, what are their concerns, what do they want from G20, which is of value to them. Yes, some of the countries of the Global South are a member of G20, but most of them are not. What are their developmental priorities? How do they see financing from the world for their developmental priorities across different areas? And that's, in a way, he sort of captured a very distilled sense of it in his remarks today. And he also emphasized, as he himself has been, that BRICS should also be a voice for Global South, the larger Global South, not just for the priorities of the BRICS countries themselves. And he also stated what has always been one of the driving impulses of India's policy, which is a close partnership with Africa, and to be a very strong, reliable, and a dependent partner of Africa's development journey. In terms of bilateral engagements on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, Prime Minister met with President Ramaphosa yesterday, first thing in the morning before the summit proceedings began, and today held bilateral meetings with leaders from Ethiopia, Senegal, Iran, and the last one was Mozambique. Later this evening, he's also expected to meet some of the thought leaders, I'm told, from South Africa. We all witnessed yesterday a historic occasion, and Honorable Prime Minister joined millions of Indians and the entire global community to watch the historic, flawless moment of landing of Vikram rover of Chandrayaan-3, soft landing on the surface of the moon. And he joined this momentous event through video conferencing, and as we all heard, subsequently addressed the nation regarding this scintillating achievement of India and Indian science and technology. Prime Minister was very warmly received, as again we saw right on the day of his arrival, by the Indian community and Indian diaspora here. And another round of welcome and felicitation was there yesterday in the evening after the successful landing of Chandrayaan. A major outcome of the BRICS summit, as the Honorable President of South Africa highlighted in the press briefing earlier this afternoon, is the decision of the BRICS leaders to expand its membership to include 6 new members. These 6 members are Argentina, as was announced, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. As my Prime Minister has said, India has been fully supportive of the BRICS expansion based on whatever consensus is arrived at between the BRICS member countries. We would like to believe that expansion of the BRICS would make it stronger, will bring in the value proposition of the 6 new members to the functioning and to the engagement, intra-BRICS engagement. If I was to capture what Honorable Prime Minister said across his various remarks in terms of specifics, I would say he broadly made, across different sessions, 15 broad key points. And the significance of these 15 points is that they are, one, very, very deeply anchored in India's own capabilities, India's own economic growth and potential, and 2, they interface in a very, very complementary way with the countries of the Global South, economies of the Global South, in terms of our cooperative structures in which this operates. So just to briefly, and also an element which is that how the overall international ecosystem of partnerships, cooperation, particularly the UN reforms, are significant. So if I was to just very quickly run through these 15 key points, first being a need to define timelines for the UN Security Council reforms. 2, something which we have been pushing very strongly even in the G20, the need to reform multilateral financial institutions. Why so? Because that's one of the key needs of developmental financing for the developing world. 3, reform of WTO, long-standing, seemingly not moving. 4, which we already achieved a successful outcome today, which was the consensus among the BRICS country to expand and include 6 new members. Given, as I said, the geopolitical and the economic churn all around, Prime Minister urged BRICS to send a global message of unity and not polarization. Prime Minister proposed creation of a BRICS Space Exploration Consortium, coming as it did in either the backdrop or in the context of India's successful landing of Chandrayaan-3. This couldn't have been more timely and more apt. Made a very specific offer, and we have been making this offer to pretty much any country and every country which is in need and which is offering the digital public infrastructure stack of India, and not on necessarily on commercial terms, but more on value terms. Whatever value you can extract. We call it public infrastructure for a particular reason, because it is more or less public good generally available for the countries of the global south. Important requirement as we go along essentially of all the BRICS countries has been that how do you map your own skill set availability within the country, the interface with the rest of the world. So he talked about need to undertake skill mapping, skilling and promoting mobility among the BRICS partner countries. He also spoke of something which is very, very deeply at the heart of South Africa and many of the other African countries, that is the protection of the big cats, the 5 big ones in South Africa, of course, under the International Big Cat Alliance. Established also, again, something which is very important for all the BRIC countries, a repository of traditional medicine among the BRICS countries. Also, something which he has again firmly believed in, led from the front, even wrote to all the leaders of the G20, which is inclusion of African Union in the G20. We have strongly proposed it, led from the front, offered our support as a permanent member of the G20. So should probably become G21 if it all goes through in that sense. The other important thing which, as I touched upon briefly also, was that importance for the BRICS countries to be sensitive to the needs of the rest of the global south, particularly in terms of developmental challenges that they face. BRICS, we all know what it stands for, which is the names of the countries, but the Prime Minister of India also gave a substantive underpinning to what each of the letters of the BRICS could stand for, in which he said B could stand for breaking barriers. You could call it economic, social, political barriers. Revitalizing economies, a central thrust given the kind of difficult times which the post-COVID period has brought for all economies of the BRICS. Inspiring innovation, naturally a direction which all countries of the BRICS want to lead to in future. Creating opportunities and, of course, shaping the future. Prime Minister also called for cooperation among the BRICS countries to address this persistent, serious challenge to the ways of our society, which is the challenge of terrorism. So cooperation to counter terrorism. Another global challenge, climate change. So environmental conservation, cyber security, food and health security, a great challenge, and to build the resilient supply chains. Prime Minister also extended invitation to all the countries to become part of many of India's international initiatives. International Solar Alliance, for example. Many of you may recall that International Solar Alliance was launched in COP15, I think it was, in Paris in 2015. And it was just 2 countries, India and France, which launched it, President Hollande and Prime Minister Modi. And now it is 120 plus member organization, essentially spreading the capacity and the knowledge relating to harnessing of solar energy for economic gains, whether it is the withdrawal of solar energy or or other ecosystem. He also spoke about one sun, one world in that sense, and one grid, coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Given the increasing intensity of natural disasters, we all talk of disaster mitigation, but one of the key elements of the disaster mitigation is to build disaster resilient infrastructure, which is very, very crucial. One Earth, One Health, and the Big Cat Alliance, as I also spoke about, as also the Global Center for Traditional Medicine. Earlier this afternoon, Honorable President of South Africa gavelled the adoption of the BRICS Johannesburg II declaration. The document is available in the public domain for all of you to peruse, but if I was to just single out in few sentences key things there. One, position on UNSC reform, BRICS position on UNSC reform to expedite it, make it democratic, make it representative of developing countries in the council memberships, not just in general reforms, and to support the legitimate aspirations of course, South Africa, but also Brazil and India to play a greater role in the UN Security Council. Permanent solution on the public stock holding in the WTO, something which I touched upon earlier. Our emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy in the resolution of conflicts, which is posing challenge for us. Need for the BRICS countries to cooperate on counterterrorism, particularly the cross-border movement of terrorists, safe havens, the countries that provide to deal with them. Other important area which is there is the cooperation in the field of medium-scale medium enterprises, small and medium enterprises. Now, while the definition of small and medium enterprises may vary from each country of BRICS to another, but the central thrust is to move forward in cooperation in key areas of development through the small and medium industries. Cooperation in traditional medicine, nuclear medicine, financial inclusion. One of the key, I would say, felt need of the communities within the BRICS which are not part of the financial system, financially excluded communities. So how do you include them financially through technology, through the digital means? Space cooperation, you will not blame me for putting that forward. Green tourism, localization of SDGs, women empowerment. In fact, my Prime Minister speaks not just of women empowerment, but also women-led development, which is qualitatively very different from simply, I would say, part passive, part active portion of women empowerment. So he actively espouses women-led development in all aspects, and climate adaptation. Prime Minister did spend some time in laying before the BRICS and also earlier today India's role in the G20 since we hold the presidency of the G20 this year, and how G20 should also not just put forward but also integrate the priorities of the Global South into the functioning of the G20, which we are trying very, very comprehensively to do. And the inclusion of African Union in the proposed leadership of India to put forward the idea of including African Union as a member of the G20 at the New Delhi summit. Prime Minister received, and he's very grateful for that, extensive congratulations from all the members of the BRICS and also the others at the outreach today on India's successful Chandrayaan mission. But more importantly, it was seen not as India's success, but success of the developing world as such. Why? Because the capacities and the capabilities that such a successful mission brings are of considerable value for the rest of the world also, particularly the developing countries. On the sidelines of the BRICS summit, Prime Minister had interactions with other BRICS leaders. In a conversation with President Xi Jinping of China, Prime Minister highlighted India's concerns on the unresolved issues along the LAC in the western sector of the India-China border areas. Prime Minister underlined that the maintenance of peace and tranquility in the border areas and observing and respecting the LAC are essential for the normalization of the India-China relationship. In this regard, the two leaders agreed to direct their relevant officials to intensify efforts at expeditious disengagement and de-escalation.